Are you concerned about what's in your Chinese herbs? Are you concerned about going and seeing a herbalist because you're unsure of what might be in there and you're scared to even ask them because you don't want to offend them, or you just are like, oh, I don't want tiger penis and endangered species and weird things in my herbs, and I don't want you to try to sneak those things into the herbs? Well, today we're going to talk about that very question, because I had that recently on my Facebook page from someone that was concerned, and they said, you know, I'm really put off by the idea that there might be tiger penis and toad, and let me see what they said. Welcome back to the Chinese Medicine Podcast. I'm Marie Hopkinson, Chinese Medicine Practitioner, and today's video is all about endangered species and the ethical practice of Chinese medicine. And particularly it relates to how it's practiced in Australia. That's where I'm from, if you haven't noticed already by my accent, I'm sure you do. I know I have people all around the world that watch this channel and I'm very much engaged in the comments and messaging and stuff within this channel. So I thought I'd do this little disclaimer on the video to say, I actually recorded this for my clinic and a question that I got on my Facebook page when I posted a video about Chinese medicine, about my clinic, and the person was like, oh, but what about all these other issues? And I think what's happened is, in recent times, like when I'm recording this now, it's the end of May 2020, you know, there is mistrust of things coming out of China for a good reason. And I think we have to address the elephant in the room, or the tiger penis in the room, and just talk about it, and to let people know what their recourse is as a consumer. So that's what this video is going to teach you. It's particularly if you're a person in Australia, if you're a person using Chinese medicine in Australia, and you think your practitioner might be you know, using something illegal, or you're not sure. I want to encourage people to have a conversation with their practitioner, because most practitioners want to do the right thing. And if you're in a country where you're not sure about what the law is, then that's, you know, you could probably just start with contacting the police or your local relevant authorities. If it's in the USA, it's the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. They are very similar to, in Australia we call it the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration. So I hope you enjoy this video, and I hope that it's valuable and useful to you. The weird ingredients that they use put me off. Rhinoceros horn, toad, just to name a few. And they use a lot of undisclosed ingredients to make it look innocent, but really one has to make up their own mind, and no thank you, I'll pass on the Chinese stuff. And so I thought that's a really good question and a really good concern, and so we need to talk about that, because I'm concerned about that as well. And I want to give you the facts about Chinese medicine in Australia and how it's practiced in Australia, and how you can see a practitioner who has a reputable supplier and who has an ethical standard in how they practice and what they do to you. And I want to let you know what's the law in Australia, so you're not going to a practitioner and having undisclosed ingredients given to you or something like that. So firstly, in Australia, Chinese medicine, Chinese herbal medicine practice is governed by AHPRA. So AHPRA.gov.au is the website where you can go to see those registered practitioners. So if you go to a practitioner and you think, they seem a bit dodgy to me, something's not right, you can check if they're registered or not. Now, it doesn't register the practice, it registers the practitioner. So there are some people practicing herbs that are probably not registered, or there may be some people practicing Chinese medicine that are not registered, but they wouldn't be allowed to call themselves a Chinese herbalist. And AHPRA registration of practitioners also doesn't protect the public from these over-the-counter kind of medications and things like that. That's the job of the TGA, or the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia. So how can you know if these weird ingredients are in there? Because it's a valid concern that you have. So firstly, I would encourage you to ask your practitioner to talk to them before you have an appointment or during your appointment. It's something that you should feel comfortable to talk about. And it's okay if one of my patients asks me about that, I would happily have that conversation with them and be open and transparent and explain to them, where do I get my herbs from? Where do herbs come from? Little baby herbs have other herbs. No, where do herbs come from? Well, they come from lots of different sources. Some herbs have to be grown in China. And some herbs are grown in Taiwan, some herbs are grown even in Australia. So you can ask your practitioner where they've come from. And particularly for my business, I've started using a supplier called Empirical Health, and what they are known for, and what they're the first company in Australia that do this, where they independently test the ingredients that they give us to make herbs from for different things that are above the standard even of like a certified organic standard. So they test for pesticides and heavy metals and things like that. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, you can jump onto my website, and there'll be a link there, and you can have a look at those things. So one of the common ways to have herbs, you can see some of these herbs in the background here. Let's have a quick look. Here's a container of dodgy, okay? So dodgy is a date, Chinese date. Now, these are also used as a food and as a medicine. And so this would be considered the raw herb. So what could happen to this is you could be given some dodgy, some of this herb, in your formula in a boiling up way. And in that way you will see a bag of sticks and leaves and things like that. And you'll be given a parcel of that to boil up every day. Now, I do use that style of Chinese medicine, but not that commonly in the clinic. The most common way that I do herbs are either in granules. Now, this is an example of that company that I was talking about before that does all the testing. So these are granules. What's in here is a powdery kind of well, it's a granule, it's not really a powder. What they do is they get the herbs and they boil them up, and they go through a processing to end up becoming like an extracted powder that then is turned into a granule. And it's a complicated process how a granule's made. But the point is the raw ingredients, the ingredients that you started with, should be tested and should be from a reputable supplier and things like that. So when you see a registered herbalist, they are going to make up a formula individually for you. Now, they may just give you something in a container, like a little pills or a powder or something like that, in a container that's already made up. And these are some little pills that I use in my clinic for some patients if it's needed, like this. And so those pills are made from the powder. So the raw herbs, like I said, this like the dodgy, it's not in that formula, but if it was used in a formula, it would be put into a grinder and ground into a powder. And then that powder could then be eaten, mixed into something and eaten, or the company can make that powder into these little pills. And so that's what they do. They grind the herbs into a powder. So there's no liquid extract or granules or anything in this the way that those pills are made. So because this is a really important issue for me in my clinic, I don't use any pre-made herbs. I make them all up myself, unless I get them from that company I was mentioning that make them in Australia. They don't put any coatings on these pills. They just make them. They use honey to make the herbal powder all stick together, and that's how they make them. Some companies will get the raw herbs that are ground, and then they'll coat them several times with various coatings, and then make those things. Now, if you go to a registered herbalist in Australia, they have to disclose the ingredients of what's in your formula. So if I was to give a patient some herbs, some granules, and it might look like this, but it'll just have a sticker on here with their name, and it won't have one herb, it'll have several herbs in the formula that have been mixed in together. And then on that label, it'll tell the patient what the names of those herbs are. So that way you're assured that you know what is in your formula, okay? So if something were to happen and you needed to know what the ingredients are, then you should have that on the bottle so you know what the ingredients are. And I would encourage you to discuss with your practitioner, and certainly I encourage my patients to do that if they're concerned about an ingredient, if they're concerned about something in there, to talk to your practitioner first, because often those questions are best answered by your practitioner rather than just Googling something where you're going to get bombarded by a huge amount of information about that. But on the bottle of your herbs, you'll usually have the first thing you'll have your name on there, and then you'll have your formula name, which is like the recognized name of that group of herbs. So for instance, this formula name is called Li Zhong Wan, and that's Chinese words, and I get that can sometimes be a bit confusing. You're thinking, oh, what does that mean? But if you were to Google that, lots of different uses of Li Zhong Wan would come up on the internet, and you'd be able to sort of see what that's for. Now that prescription has these known ingredients that, so every time it's made up, it's not like a secret formula by that practitioner, it's a known formula name. And so the practitioner that's giving it to you would usually give it to you exactly how it's meant to be made, unless they have good reason to change it. So they might have added something in or taken something out specifically for your condition. And so then usually on the bottle you'll see, like if I was to give a patient Legion 1 but add something into it, I would say Legion 1 modified or mod or something like that on the bottle, so the patient would know, or I would know by reading that, what is in there. And then underneath that it'll list the ingredients of what's in there and the dosages of those ingredients. And then also on the bottle it should say how that formula's been dispensed, so whether it's in granules or raw herbs ground into powder or something like that. And then your practitioner should give you some instructions on how to do that. Now there's lots of ways they can do that. They can write it on the bottle, and usually they will write something on the bottle, but they will usually give you an explanatory sheet. I make my patients a video and show them how to do it as well, so that you know how to consume those herbs in the best way, because some herbs have a very complicated way of taking them, and some herbs are very simple. Some herbs you just mix the 2 teaspoons with hot water and drink it down. Some herbs you need to mix it with honey. Some herbs you might boil on the stove a little bit. Some herbs you might boil up, and some before others, or things like that. So your practitioner will give you those instructions specifically, and they might not write that on the label. They might it might be too big to write on the label, so they might even give you a piece of paper that shows you, here's how to do your herbs. It's your practitioner's job to make sure that you're informed how to do the herbs properly, so that you're going to go home and do the herbs in the correct way that's right for you. Usually with my patients, I'll give them a phone number and an email address, so they can call me or they can email, whichever's convenient for them, and if there's something that they need to talk to me about whilst they're taking the herbs. And all that depends on how often you're going to see the patient, and I would normally give the patient some advice about what to expect going forward. This might give you a bit of loose stools for a few days, for instance, would be a common thing that I might tell patients. Now, we're still talking about the issues of these weird ingredients that might be in there, tiger penis, toads, things like that. So in Australia, we don't use endangered species in herbs. So a registered herbalist is not going to have any rhinoceros horn on their shelf. And if they do, that's illegal. If they do, they're breaking the law. And so you can either report them to the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and they'll cop a massive fine for doing that. And they'll also be, through the TGA, they'll probably be alerted to the CITES, the people that the Convention on Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. So those guys might get involved as well, or they might be informing the TGA. But the TGA are like the police for those things, right? And so what the TGA can do is, if they think a shop is selling weird ingredients or endangered species, they can go and raid that shop, as in they can go in and they can have a warrant and they can search that premises for those ingredients, and they can seize those goods and check them. So if you think those things are being sold somewhere, that's your recourse as a consumer. You can do that. You can also call the police. If you think some illegal activity is happening with endangered species in Australia, you can call the police and alert them to it, and they'll tell you, how to proceed from there. If it's a registered practitioner, if it's a Chinese herbalist, an acupuncturist in Australia, then you can look up their registration on AHPRA, AHPRA.gov.au, and you can firstly check if they're registered, okay? So you can see if they're registered, and if they are registered, they should be following those guidelines. And so you can call AHPRA for some advice and say, hey, I went to see this practitioner and, I think they gave me tiger penis, or I think they gave me rhinoceros horn. I would encourage you to check with your practitioner first before you just assume that it's rhinoceros horn, because you might be sifting through your herbs and think, oh, this looks a bit like something, and it might not be that at all. So don't just ring up the AHPRA and dob them in without having, a good reason to do that, is what I'm saying. So most practitioners want to do the right thing. Most practitioners are not trying to mislead you. Most practitioners are in Chinese medicine because they want to help patients and they want to help people. And my other concern to say, in Australia, the use of those ingredients is incredibly expensive, incredibly. So if a practitioner were to go about breaking the law and giving out tiger penises and giving out you know, endangered species, those things are so expensive. And not only is the practitioner risking their registration if they're registered, or risking a fine from the TGA, if they're not charging a huge amount of money for that, I don't know why they would be doing it. Another thing to consider is that there's so many alternatives to these products that it makes it seem like it's almost implausible for these people to be doing that in Australia. I'm not talking about other countries. There's plenty of other countries that do that. So I understand as a consumer, you might see terrible things about different animals on the news and think, oh, Chinese medicine's, you know, causing these populations and these, you know, causing detriment to these species and things like that. And then think, I don't want to see any Chinese herbalists. But there's lots of herbalists like myself, lots of herbalists in Australia that want to do the right thing, that care about the animals, that care about the environment. So then that might bring your attention to things that are not necessarily endangered species, but they are weird ingredients, or they are animal-based ingredients. So if you're a vegan or you're a vegetarian, and you don't want to have animal products in your herbs, you need to talk to your practitioner about what the alternatives are. And in some cases, they might say, hey, you need to have this herb, you need to have this product in the herbs. In my clinic, the closest thing I use regularly to any animal product would be what we call the donkey hide gelatin, which is Herbalist. Now that's what it's classically known as, or traditionally known as. And a few years ago, it started to become really, really obvious that there was a lot of cruelty done to donkeys in that industry. And that's one of the things that it's terrible in our industry that happens. And I don't know why they are so cruel to those donkeys in the pursuit of getting the gelatin. It's a horrible things that are sort of happening to those donkeys. And so the supplier that I use sourced a bovine type of gelatin that they know is ethically sourced, and so we use that instead of the donkey hide gelatin. And so I'm really, really happy with the supplier that I use, because they are more concerned than I am about these things. Like, they're super duper concerned, and they go to the point of not even supplying it. So they don't even give you a choice whether, you know, you can use it or not. If they think it's unethical, they've basically stopped supplying that product. And there's tons of practitioners who wouldn't really care that they could supply it to, but they've decided to kind of do that for the betterment of society and the betterment of animals and things like that. So I just want people to know that there are companies out there who care. There are practitioners out there who care. And look, I care a lot about getting the results for my patients. I care a lot about interacting with the environment in a sustainable way, in an ethical way, because that's what Chinese medicine's about. It's not about raping the environment for the betterment of capitalism and you know, marching forward at all costs. But there are some things where you might need to use a certain herb or a product that you should have a conversation with the patient about that as a practitioner. And as a patient, you should feel that you can have that conversation with your practitioner and ask them, you know, are there any animal products in my herbs, or you know, to ask them those questions. So I hope this video has been useful and helpful to you. And please, if you're not sure about those things and you want to try Chinese medicine, then you feel free to ask me those questions. If you don't want to put it in the comments below, you can send it as a private message or an email to me, and I'll do my best to answer you. So thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next video. So I hope you do enjoy this video and the content is relevant and valuable to you. Just bear in mind, I did make this video for my patients, but I thought I would share it with the wider audience of this channel because I thought it would still bring some value to you. And it's such a topical issue right now, talking about these ethical ingredients and where do my herbs come from and all those kinds of issues. The other video I'd love to point your attention to is I did an interview with the person that runs the company I'm talking about in this video that I use now. And I've been using their herbs for like a year or so now. Or maybe more than that, but I've been using their herbs for at least a year or so now. And that's Simon Feeney. So his video is on this channel, and it's called Talking About Safety and Quality of Chinese Herbs with Dr. Simon Feeney. So he's a Chinese herbalist and an acupuncturist, and he has a better way of articulating those issues than I do. And so if you want a broader sort of stroke kind of look at those issues, then definitely watch that video. It's really well worth watching. And these are questions that you should be able to raise with your practitioner. You should be able to talk to them about it, find that information out before you see them, and you should be free to ask what's in your herbs and know what's in your herbs.
Thanks for listening to the Chinese Medicine Podcast. Did you know we're also on TikTok? And you can find shorter videos on Facebook and Instagram that you might like to share with your friends and family. You can also find our podcast on Apple, Spotify, and all places where you listen to audio podcasts. I look forward to seeing you again on the next video soon.